social value for Wilmot Dixon Interiors and the Programmes Coordinator for the Scholarship Awards Committee. Tonight, I have the absolute pleasure of being your host for this evening's session. Before we kick off, just some housekeeping before we get started. The event is being recorded, so please can I just ask everyone to turn off their mics and their cameras, and if you do have any questions throughout today's session, please, if you could just feel free to use the chat bar. We'll pick those up as we go along. I'm really honoured this evening to welcome a range of guest speakers who will be supporting our scholar this evening, Jamie Tong. So we have Mike Foy, President of CIOB, who's joining us, along with Malcolm Shields, who's a Package She Manager at Costain Group, Allison Nichol, Head of Constructing Excellence, and Sandy Rees-Jones, who is our Vice President of CIOB, and of course our talented scholar, Jamie Tong. After Jamie's research presentation, there will be a chance to offer some quick fire questions and comments, and then we're going to head over for a debate with our roundtable guests. So without further ado, I shall now pass over to Deborah Pullen to kick off this evening's session.
So good evening, everybody. Also take the opportunity to welcome you. And I'm the chair of the Company Constructors Scholarships and Awards Committee. And thank you for joining us to hear about Jamie's work. Before we get on to the main event, I just want to provide some context for the programme for those who don't know what it's about. As many people will know, as head of his business and also president of the CIOB, Sir Ian Dixon was an active promoter of innovation and continued learning throughout his career. This resulted in the launch of the scholarships programme in 1997 by Lady Dixon in memory of her husband. And I'm delighted to particularly welcome Lady Dixon to the event this evening and take the opportunity to also thank her for her continued support. The programme enables young professionals to complete short research projects which both develop their research skills and also share their findings for the wider value of the construction community. And over the last 20 years, a diverse range of topics have been covered, which have initiated further activities for the scholars and their employers, and also stimulated debate and wider action within our industry. The topic for tonight's talk, I'm sure, is going to be no exception to that. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to John Oliver, who has been mentoring Jamie through his project, to introduce himself and also Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening, everyone. And I'm really honoured to be introducing Jamie's work this evening. So just introducing our Sir Ian Dixon scholar, Jamie Tong, and his work this evening is really on the implications of utility strikes. And the work that he's done was prompted by sort of first-hand experience of strikes, and coming to the conclusion that the industry had not done enough for this whole area was almost the Cinderella topic in construction. And I guess just in preparation for this tonight, I just did a bit of digging on the HSE website just to refresh my memory, and there's some quite startling statistics in there. When you look at 1.5 million kilometres of particularly buried services in the UK, and some of the stats are quite sobering. Between 2012 and 2016, the number of cable strikes increased by 668%. And that sort of bears up Jamie's thesis that this is a neglected area. So I think it's really important work because it, at the end of the day, a big part of what we're here to do is to protect the operatives, protect the users of these facilities. And I think the work that Jamie's done is a big step forward in doing that. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jamie to take you through the fruits of his labours over the last 12 months.
Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you, John, for the introduction. As he mentioned, we will be talking about utilities today, specifically utility strikes. So let's begin. So a little bit about myself. So I work as a building service engineer for Sorrow McAlpine and have been doing so for nearly 3 years now. Prior to this, however, I was still working in the industry. I was in and about a little bit, but still gained about 4 years experience. I took on this opportunity actually to be a challenge for myself. I wanted to push and learn new things, and I can definitely say that I have. So a little bit about the research. So most of the research was carried out in the first 6 to 8 months, and this was mostly research papers, articles, and news extracts. However, it was also backed up by HSE documentation, and also I carried out my own snapshot survey, and that sounds exactly what it is. There was a snapshot of a construction site, medium to large size, interviewing 15 personnel across 4 companies. And as I said, this was to give me a good figure to base my research upon. So because we're talking about utilities, I should probably give you a couple of definitions. So what are utilities? So utilities actually relate to any product, service, or equipment that relates to energy, telecommunications, water, and sewage. So therefore, the personnel responsible for them are the utility companies. For instance, UKPN or UK Power Network will look after electrical cables, installation, and maintaining of them in the south of England. And utility strikes are defined as an unplanned contact with a utility service. So this could be a mechanical breaker going through a sewage pipe, or this could be an excavation bucket hitting or striking an electrical cable. I didn't actually start my scholarship talking about this though. I actually started it based on the construction lag in technology in the construction industry. We tend to be a bit slow to take up new ideas and adopt new ideas, and I wanted to look into this. However, actually, I witnessed my first strike and my first repair on a construction site, and I was actually so shocked by the outdated methodologies used and the dangers that operatives were in. I wanted to carry out this survey and this work to see if this was the case everywhere. I've actually got that video here today, and I want to talk you through a little bit before I play it what's going on here. This is a repair of a water main now. It wasn't struck, there was a tree going across it that dislodged, so therefore it's leaking at this point. It's at significant pressure, which you'll very quickly realize. For those of you that don't know, when a utility company comes to a site, they tend to be a law upon themselves. Therefore, all the work carried out here was agreed with their manager, and therefore his responsibility to manage that. Now, all I can say about this video is please bear in mind, this was the agreed method. This is what was agreed, this was deemed safe. Here you can see they're trying to slide on the repair. And that water actually hit him with such velocity it knocked over his helmet, and as you can see, caused him to stumble around. I want to reiterate, that was the agreed method. That was deemed acceptable by the utility company. I want to talk you through, for those that don't understand, what we're dealing with, what we're talking about here. This is a typical photo that you would find in any excavation carried out in a built up or city area. Have a look around. What services do you think there are? Well, here are all the services you've got. So starting in the top right corner in the grey ducts, you've got BT Communications. Coming down the black cables that go into the grey box, you've got low voltage and a joint box. The red cables, meaning danger they are, they're the high voltage. That's 11,000 and 33,000 volts. You also have a gas main in yellow, and in the green ducts going across the bottom of your screen, they're Virgin Media comms. The only thing you're missing from this is water. And as I said, this is a typical excavation that you'd expect to see. 4 million holes of these are dug annually by the utility companies. This doesn't include contracting works or any other site works. This is the utility companies alone. Now that's 4 million chances for this to occur. That's what an 11,000 volt strike looks like. As you can see, the operator was using a handheld breaker and caused the strike with this implement. He suffered severe burns to his face and chest, and as you can imagine, luckily though, he didn't receive a shock. He did survive this. In 2015, Amy, the construction company, was delivered a £600,000 fine from the HSE for an incident similar to this. This is what we're talking about. These are the real stakes now. This is life or death, providing the excavation is carried out safely, and that is the difference. And that is why I've changed my title to look and explore this, because it is a real issue in our construction industry, and we need to implement change. As John said, it is getting worse. It's exponentially increasing. The HSE states that in the last 5 years, or in 5 years, apologies, 668% has been the increase in strikes for electrical cables alone. What's more worrying is actually the equipment that causes the strikes. In the construction industry, for those that aren't aware, when you carry out an excavation, you get to a certain point when you know you've found a service, and then you use hand tools to carry out this excavation. It's slower, but it's supposed to be more methodical and act safer. However, what you can see from the Utility Strike Avoidance Group's statement in 2019, actually this isn't correct. Hand tools caused the most strikes, followed very closely by excavators and mini diggers. So a big thing I want to talk about is the cable avoidance tool, or the CAT. This is a handheld device that works in partnership with a Jenny. Now this is an induction device that works, as I said, in partnership with the CAT. Now, they detect electromagnetic fields of live cables and can also detect metallic objects within the ground. Working together, they detect 67.5% of all services. But there's a big problem with how they're used. First of all, the Jenny is not commonly used on site. It is mostly the cable avoidance tool. It should be a 15 to 20 minute scan in order to create a better scan, a more detailed scan, and also a more accurate scan. However, if this is rushed or not carried out correctly, this accuracy is significantly decreased. It also needs to be managed correctly, and something that came out of my survey was actually 33% of personnel. So a third of all personnel that work around and deal with utilities and operatives working on utilities are not trained in how to use a cable avoidance tool. These were mostly managers and health and safety personnel. The issue that this highlights is you cannot safely and correctly manage personnel working, carrying out these surveys, if you don't know whether they're doing it correctly or not. Another issue is the fact that it's acronyms. I've used it many times already tonight. It's a CAT, cable avoidance tool. However, this acronym has led to a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication. So this is a direct quote of a cable avoidance tool reseller, retail unit. And they've said the CAT scanner is a classic industry standard locator used to determine the exact location of buried pipes and cables. What happens if I told you they only actually detect 45% of services when used alone? That is wildly inaccurate, this statement. They only detect 45% of services. And that is reflected that out of 255 incidences where CAT scans were carried out, only 52% failed to detect the service. I put this to myself in another terminology and another phrase. How can you expect operatives to work in this 50-50 environment? Would you carry out a lift with this ratio? So why is it acceptable then for excavations to be carried out with this percentage of accuracy? I'd like to talk to you a little bit about utility companies as well, specifically their lack of involvement. Another issue that this industry has is the fact that companies, or utility companies, pass on the responsibility of asset avoidance to contractors. Contractors pass this on to the operatives working on it. And as you can see by this diagram, actually what you end up with is operatives carrying out excavations with personal objectives at the forefront of their minds and personal self-preservation being the number one objective. Now, this is completely right. I agree with this. However, what it's been known to happen in the industry is that actually an operative will be a lot careful around electrical cables, but won't avoid fiber optics. Now, for the business, for the company, that's a significant difference. The average strike cost for an electrical cable is £970. However, for the business, i.e. through the direct costs of a fiber repair, that's closer to £2,800. So this pass the buck attitude that's currently happening isn't productive and it doesn't help. It's worth noting as well that this is the reverse in America. This lack of attention to detail and very reactive method by the utility companies is shown by this stat here. Out of 89 incidences where the utility service was shown on the drawing, 84% stated the location of this was inaccurately plotted. So how do operatives and contractors know where services are? If they can't use a cable avoidance tool to detect it, and it's not on the drawing in the right location, how are they supposed to know it's there? There's also a big lack of protocol being carried out. Every utility company has their own rules and regulations to which services should be installed to and abided by. However, either ground conditions or shortcuts being taken means these aren't always carried out. Let's go back to this original photo we looked at. How would you install services in here in a nice trench in a straight line, 600 mil below the finished floor level with all of this within it? It is becoming increasingly difficult for these to be carried out, and therefore best fit rule tends to be applied, which leads to complications when re-excavated further down the line. Other mythology issues. So I'd like to talk about human error. As you can see by this strikes by the time of day again from the utility strike avoidance group, you can see the two peak times. This is at 9:30 and 12 p.m. These are the industry standard for break times. And what can be concluded from this is you're more likely to cause a strike when closer to breaks due to rushing because of the operatives. Vacuum excavation is a great method of carrying out excavation, but it does come with one big flaw. Its price tag. It costs around £2,000 a day and has a 50% decrease in efficiency. So whilst incredibly safe, actually, this method isn't available to all. So to summarize, how can we expect contractors to carry out safe excavations if they're not provided with the tools and the time to do so? I'd like to walk you through a case study now. Can anyone notice what's wrong with this photo? Well, circled in red is a nick on a HV cable, and this is what that nick looks like once repaired. So on the 3rd of November last year, a civil engineering company was carried out a vacuum excavation in a safe manner, and luckily they noticed this damage to the HV cable. They stopped works, reported it, and the utility company came out to make this repair. In the left photo, you can see a cross-sectional area of how this should look, and it indicated in red was the chunk of cable that was actually missing. On the right-hand side, circled in white, you can see in real life how this actually looked. It was 2.5 mil away from being an 11,000 volt HV strike. That is the second video that I showed you. That's how close they were. This was then buried and forgotten about to become someone else's problem in the future. Another case study. On the 11th of March, 2020, notice the time, peak time for a strike. A civil engineering company was carrying out removing a section of road. They had the correct methodology. They knew there was a gas main underneath the road, however, it was at a safe depth. Along the road, however, on the gas main, there was a pressure reducing valve that teed up to the surface. Whilst the gas main was shown, the T for the pressure reducing valve rising to the surface was not. Once more, it was encased in concrete. Again, lack of protocol being followed. This shouldn't have been the case. This meant that when the excavator went to pull up this section, it ripped up the pressure reducing valve. This was a 25 mil pipe rising to the surface that caused a strike to occur. Therefore, a significant amount of gas was released into the environment. So the direct impacts relates to anything with the immediate repair and the costs associated with this repair. You can see a breakdown and an itemized list on the right-hand side from Southern Gas Network. And in this case, it was total to be £1,258. However, what were the other costs and the other impacts associated with this? So looking to the indirect impacts, because this was close to a hotel and plant, such as a generator, this had to be shut down. Because the generator was shut down, the hotel had to be evacuated. Once more, all plant that was working in that area had to be shut down as well. The nearby basement had to be evacuated, which meant a third of the site became an exclusion zone for the day. This is a significant decrease in productivity. What's more though, however, this was a Riddle reported incident. Should there have been a spark in the air as well, you can only imagine the further implications to this. Strikes do affect everyone, so I want to talk about the social and environmental impacts of this. Obviously, for a couple of hours, there was a huge amount of gas released into the environment. There was complaints to the contractor about this smell, and there was a less acceptance of construction occurring in the area. And finally, there was actually damage to the client and contractor relationship. Here you can see all the impacts listed, and as I said, strikes really do affect everyone. The total implications have been valued at a ratio of 1 to 29. This means for every pound incurred during the direct cost bill, an estimated £29 will be associated with the indirect and social cost. These are incredibly hard to value, as you can imagine. However, in this case, using this ratio, is valued at £36,500. Is this a contributing factor? Well, from my survey, it turns out the 42% said it wasn't. 42%, nearly half of everyone on site, didn't bother about the cost. This question, to reiterate, wasn't about whether it should be the priority. This is about whether it was even a factor carrying out strikes. From my research, I've concluded actually a lot of people aren't aware of the amount of money that a strike can cost. So what do I want the outcomes to be of my work? Obviously, I'm ranting to you guys, I'm explaining my issues, but what do I want to happen? Well, I want there to be industry change, and there's industry change that could be implemented, maybe not quite today, but tomorrow morning first thing. I've itemized 4 things that could very easily happen. Number 1, I'd like excavation works to stop 10 minutes before breaks to allow for alternative activities to take place. The objective of this is to decrease these 2 peak times and smooth out this harshness. Secondly, I want there to be bonus incentive for workers for when strikes are reduced per month. Thirdly, I believe that Cat and Jenny should be rephrased to Jenny and Cat. The Jenny needs to become the priority now. And I would like as-built surveys from developers to be coordinated into utility drawings. At present, they're not. That is simply the company, when they finish working in the area, giving their set of underground drawings. That is a very simple way of updating. So what are the impacts of such small changes? Well, first of all, point 1 would decrease the risk of the decrease of strikes to around 150 a day, simply by stopping 10 minutes before work to ensure contractors weren't rushing. Secondly, having an active approach aimed at operators to focus on avoiding strikes will mean that it's beyond just self-preservation. Thirdly, by introducing and using this Jenny, you have a 22.5% increase in ability to detect services. This is a 5th just handed to you by a small investment. And fourthly, by having as-built surveys, it means there's accurate install services, therefore will reduce the risk of a further strike occurring. So what am I looking to change further on? Well, actually, out of the back of this, I launched my own business called Skinetics. And the goal of this is to provide the new gold standard of safety on site. I believe that change is required, and actually this was accepted by the industry. From my survey, I worked out that 83% of personnel want and would prefer an alternative system in place for carrying out excavations. Currently, my next steps is to look for partnership and industry backing, and I've actually just been accepted onto business development pathway for Innovate UK. So to summarise, 50% of personnel have witnessed a strike. Every other person that works in and around services has witnessed a strike. That is how common they are. That is how often they occur. Therefore, there needs to be industry acceptance that change is required, because strikes really do affect everyone. And at present, there is no current system that provides all-round protection. Thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant. Well done, Jamie. Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. Everyone, we have about 5 minutes for a quick round of questions if anyone has anything that they would like to ask Jamie about what you've just heard. So you can either drop those in the comments box, or if you want to put up your hands, we can scroll across and you can unmute and ask your question. Let's have a little look. One question I was going to ask you, Jamie, was is resolving this issue a priority for companies?
I actually believe, because of this underlying further implications from strikes, I don't believe that utility companies actually know the full value that they're being charged with.
Mm-hmm.
You have your QSs, your quantity surveyors receive a bill for £1,200. Now, if you're doing a multi-million-pound redevelopment, that's not a huge amount of money. However, if it actually turns out to be closer to, £40,000, that might start getting some attention. But it's also the implications that aren't recorded beyond the financial. You're looking at the impacts to personnel and operatives. We always say in the construction industry, everyone has a right to go home safely. And that's one of the biggest changes and the reason for developing this. But other things that companies don't necessarily account for and summarize is actually the loss of working hours. We're all very good in the construction industry being incredibly inefficient, and not many people bat an eyelid to a third of your construction site being shut down. However, this was a very simple and avoidable mistake should a couple of steps been taken.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jamie. We've got actually a couple of questions. Malcolm Shields, I'll come over to you and then to Andrew before we go into our roundtable panel discussion.
Lovely. Thanks, Anna. Just a quick comment, really. I liked the whole presentation, Jamie. Great stuff. Particularly interested in the end about what's next. What can we do? And I'd like to throw my weight in the position I'm in with the company I am, and also in my role as chair of the Irish Construction Group behind that. I love the idea of stopping excavations 10 minutes before those breaks, because there is clear data there, a lot that supports what Jamie said around, there are core times when these type of incidents take place. So I'd love to, there's an offer of help there, Jamie, and I like the idea about incentivizing no strikes. Yeah, good stuff.
No, I really appreciate that, Malcolm. One of the things that I must admit, writing it was, I noticed a trend. I wanted to come up with a solution for resolving that trend, and these were kind of ideals and hopes almost. So it's really good to hear that actually you would be able to implement that. So thank you very much, Malcolm.
Brilliant. Andrew, we'll come over to you.
Hi there, my name's Andrew Hornby. Jamie, we did actually speak just before Christmas about some of your research, and I was interested in it. And it's great bit of study you've done, and I'd be very interested actually to know what your proposed business is going to do. And it's great that doing this scholarship has led you and inspired you to do that. Don't tell me now, although you can, I'm sure, later. But I just wanted to talk about one thing, and that was the incentivizing contractors or crews to avoid strikes, by some kind of bonus for not having as many as before. What about, I wonder what you're thinking about this, what about tracking and measuring the behaviours that will lead to avoiding the strikes? Because rather than counting the strikes afterwards and saying, oh, that's good, it was less than last month, how about focusing on some leading indicators as to, what are the behaviours that are needed, whether it's training, getting the design information about the layout of services and so on, about the things we can do in advance to prevent them. I wonder if that might be a consideration.
No, Andrew, that is exactly what we're talking about here. I love that idea. The problem and the whole problem with utilities is incredibly reactive. You know, you've hit something, you then make a phone call. There's no proactive measures. So anything that you'd be willing to implement, any ideas, I'd obviously be very keen to discuss this outside of this and further. But the whole industry needs to shift to go, actually, these aren't acceptable anymore. Okay, they might happen once in a while when we only had a few cables on the ground, but that's not the case now. You know, with fiber optics coming in, the costs are increasing, the repairs are becoming more complicated, services are becoming more redundant, it's harder to repair now because they're degrading in the soil. So anything that's more proactive to implement that, I'm incredibly fond of, and I love that. So I'd be very keen to take this further outside.
Brilliant. We've got one more question from Robert. We're going to have to press on though, because we've got the round table. So Robert, is it a quick one that we could perhaps debate in the round table?
Yeah, a very quick one if you don't mind. Jamie, firstly, well done, well considered presentation, really enjoyed that. Just a quick one, particular interest around the CAT scans. Am I correct in saying that the CAT scans only actually pick up electricity if it's flowing through the cable, i.e. if it's turned off, it's not going to pick up anything flowing? Would I be right in saying that?
So there's actually three different types of search you can use. So you can have the power search that does, or you can have a passive search that picks up and that starts looking for actually metallic objects in the ground. So they can, however, the Jenny is used to induce that almost acts like it's a live cable.
Okay.
So prime example, you've got a lamppost, you wrap your Jenny to induce a kind of current down that. It doesn't, but induces electromagnetic field, and then the CAT scan can actually pick that up a lot better, so it suddenly becomes a lot more accurate of a device. They can detect non-live cables, however, not very well.
Good, thank you. And I think the most important point you picked up, I was aware of there's been a lot of move over recent years in terms of as-built drawings associated with projects, which is fine. But I think one of the missings has definitely been as-built drawings and detail of that associated with underground services. That, to me, the accuracy of that would be all important in the future, I think. But well done, brilliant presentation, really thought-provoking. Well done. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert, and everybody. Really good start to the conversation. I'm going to hand over to Deborah now and our guest panelists for a bit further debate.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anna. And again, well done, Jamie. It's such a fantastic endpoint to your project. And just so everybody in the audience knows, there will be a detailed report and outputs from Jamie, which give you much more of the content of the research he's done that you can access via the website over the next few weeks. So I guess for the round table, what I'd like to do is widen the topic in terms of innovation in general. And also I want to try and keep it positive, because I think the danger is we can all sit here and say we need more, we need better, we all know that. But for the time we've got, I've asked the panel to think really about, well, what's been good, whether it's a single event or a general shift in the industry. And if ever there was a time for use of innovation to stabilize us, now's it, I think, whether that because of global growth or the challenges that we're all facing, expectations from asset owners, or indeed, reactivating after something like the COVID. So I think there's a real need for this. But I think it's more about what motivates people, and are they doing it because they have to, or they do it because they see that actually it's the right thing to do, and particularly in terms of their own competitiveness. So I want to try and reflect on that really, in terms of good examples, and then we can maybe debate how might industry embrace it more and share it more and get maximum value. So I'm going to start with Malcolm, actually, because in many ways Jamie's topic is quite close to your world in relation particularly to health and safety, even though Jamie's already rightfully said this is also about productivity and the like. Well, I'd just be good to get a reflection from you in terms of how much of a motivation has safety been for new innovation, whether it be products or approaches or methods, and where might there be some good examples, but also how can we get that topic as a primary driver, as well as a new widget or a new gadget or a new material?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. Yeah, I'm kind of, I would have been able to give Jamie 2 wonderful case studies. In 2021, on this project, it's a large project. We've got about £800 million worth of infrastructure works on the highways. And we've hit the 20 kV cable and a 33 kV cable, different backgrounds to them both. And root cause is slightly different. So we kind of almost took that 10 minutes before construct, but we just stopped every bit of excavation on a job and to reflect back on what can we do better. We're trying to be as digital as we can on this project. So how can we improve what we do to prevent the likelihood or reduce it as low as possible of those strikes? So in an ideal world, we would all have a kind of BIM type model of what's under the ground before you start work. That is a long way off, and I don't think we'll ever get there really. We might get there for what's known as C2 information, so initial searches, which are really indicative drawings with lots of caveats against them. We've kind of went the other way, and we've mapped out every single service on the job. We've went right down through the hierarchy that PAS 128 talks about, which is the document which is there to provide you guidance around avoiding underground services. And we've gone from the right through Cat and Jenny that Jamie's talked about, right down to literally trial holing until we found and had a real accurate location of where there was every service is. And then what we do is all that information is actually recorded on an app, using GIS, and it's sent back to where we have a cloud-based version of where we can develop a drone that will show us accurately, not only in terms of where the service runs, but in terms of its depth, in terms of what it is. So that's what, in terms of innovations, I certainly think that's one of the ways that we're trying to do it and be more digital. And it really is about
that. What was some of the motivations? Why did you do it?
3 reasons. One reason, we don't want to hurt anybody. Secondly, Jamie's quite right. The cost and time and effect on a program from a utility strike is horrendous. In fact, so I think some of Jamie's figures were conservative. It certainly cost us a lot more money on the 2 strikes that we had. And thirdly, because we want to be as digital as we can and innovate as much as we can, not only for ourselves as a learning organisation, but that will help us in future work with our clients. If we can demonstrate to clients what we've done, we've avoided hitting any underground services. This is how we did it. We used these innovations. This is how we recorded information. And at the end of the job, interestingly, 1 or 2 comments about the health and safety file and what's left behind. There you go. There's a 3D model of what's, of the apparatus that are within your boundary. So yeah, that's definitely the drivers.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Malcolm. We'll come back to you. I now want to move to Allison Nichol, and obviously as head of Constructing Excellence, they're a innovation network of 400 plus organisations. So it'd be good to get your perspective, Allison, on maybe the shift over the last 10 years in relation to general interest in or adoption of innovation by, I guess, some of the trailblazers, but also what's your perspective on that filtering down within their supply chains, or indeed other innovative players coming into the market?
I think one of the things that Malcolm actually touched on was that digitalisation journey. And I think that's really accelerated since COVID. Actually, a lot of people have had to rely on data and rely on digital technologies, and organizations that probably didn't think they could be digital now can employ digital technologies. Then that might not just be BIM or the obvious things, but actually things that help with site productivity, etc. So I think there's a lot more trust coming through. I think construction has always been innovative, but it hasn't always recognized that it's being innovative. It's very good at problem solving, but not actually systemizing that. And I think we're starting to see organizations coming through that are helping with that. We do beat ourselves up a lot that we're sort of laggers in terms of taking on new technologies, but actually there's there's almost late mover advantage for construction companies in terms of you're taking technologies that may have been tried and tested elsewhere and employing them in that construction context. And we shouldn't, you know, just because we're late to the party doesn't mean we can't enjoy it and take full advantage of it. And I think we need to sort of start thinking in those terms. I think there are some fantastic organizations that have been trailblazing on innovation for a long time. I think there's a lot that can be done with major projects. We've got some of those major projects online at the moment to really trial and test and use some of that budget and headroom to develop technologies, develop systems. And I think there's a real need to try and push that through into mainstream practice. And I think it's in that mainstream practice that we can get the most value for the rest of the industry. But some things go really quickly, and then some things, you know, once people realize it's a problem and there's something they can do about it, I think like the work that Jamie's been doing, you know, why wouldn't you? It doesn't seem, you know, and people will take that on board quite quickly because it impacts their bottom line.
I'd just like to jump in here then, Alison, sorry. So you pointed out tried and tested technology, which obviously holds no risk to companies then. But obviously innovation doesn't come with a tried and tested history. How do you overcome this kind of chicken and egg scenario then? How would you advise that?
I think somebody's got to take risk. And, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunities now, especially with the way that digital technologies are coming through. You can do lots of optioneering. You can test solutions really quickly at less cost now. And I think clients need to take a lead in some of this to support their supply chains to deliver this. We are actually starting to see a lot of tech companies targeting the construction space. They've sort of come in waves, I think, in the past and gone, oh no, don't understand this, because it is a complex, you know, you don't know how the decisions are made from an outside perspective into the construction sector. And I think, you know, we need to take a different attitude to risk, because obviously there's a risk and a cost to implementing this technology or these approaches, but actually do we fully understand the risk of not dealing with this? You know, and there's a cost to that, which you've actually very clearly articulated, but that cost was hidden. So there's a lot of hidden costs that that innovation can overcome, but unless it's spelled out to people, they don't necessarily see it as a problem.
Great, thank you, Alison. I'll move over to Mike Foy now to maybe reflect a little bit on knowledge and skills and I guess the fit for purpose of the supply chain to be able to not just understand where innovation and you know, often it isn't about technology, it's about method and approach, and could be quite simple. But you know, where do you think we are with awareness, knowledge, skills? How much can that drive not just the understanding what innovation can give, but actually make sure that innovation is applied appropriately as well, which is really important?
Yeah, I think, Debs, I think we've made a good start, but I think we've got somewhere to go. Yeah, I mean, Jamie said when he started his delivery that we're a bit slow, and I think that's one of the problems that the industry has had. It's got some cracking ideas, but then, and we do react to a crisis very well in the industry, but then we seem somehow to slip back into old practices. Clients have been mentioned. I've actually got my theme for this year as the client, because I'm a passionate believer in collaboration, and I think about the client, contractors, all the supply chain, including its suppliers, and also educational establishments. I think everybody's got to play their part in bringing about what I call true innovation, because I think what we're good at is adapting what we've got to make things more efficient. But sometimes we perhaps not as good at what I would call true innovation as we need to be. And there is a place for doing things that we've done traditionally, doing them better. I think if we do step up to the mark in terms of innovation, we stand a better chance as well of encouraging other people to join the industry who historically have not found construction very attractive. You know, why have we got the age profile of the industry, you know, over 50, a dramatic number of people not necessarily being replaced at the other end. Allison's talked about digital technology and all that that brings. If we think about the Grenfell disaster, and we think about the possible good things that could come from that in terms of the digital golden thread and all the aspects of responsibility and pinning down responsibility in the entire process. The proposals coming out of the building safety bill, by some people are just recognised as being for high-rise residential buildings. That couldn't be further from the truth. And the sooner the industry recognises that, the better for all. Modern methods of construction, MMC, there's a tremendous amount of innovation that can be brought about as a result of that. Once again, the age profile plays a factor there. We will see more, I think we'll see more manufacturing environment, products being made in the factory. That will perhaps encourage other people to join the industry, perhaps encourage younger people who are dead keen on doing things differently to actually join us and actually drive this innovation better than we perhaps are at the present time. I think Allison hinted that we do talk ourselves down sometimes, and I think we do. And I think up and down the country there are some great examples of some great projects being done. And yes, Allison, I think we do need to use those they are big budgets, you know, and there's the possibility there and the option perhaps to actually drive some of this a little bit further than we have done so far. I could go on to talk about the fragmented nature of the business model within the industry, because let's be honest, it is so fragmented. You know, I go back to, I know others on the call do, go back to Michael Latham. And Michael actually said, you know, if you were to get on a plane, knowing that the level of defects in that plane were the same level of defects within the construction industry, would you fly? And you wouldn't. And yet his words ring true to me to this day, as much as they did 20, 25 years ago. So I believe, I am actually quite positive about all this, believe it or not. And I think it has been touched on by someone else, but we do have lessons to learn perhaps from other industries as well. And we need to look outward rather than just looking inward all the time. They're my thoughts. I mean, I could go on at length, but I think I'll leave it at that for now, Debs. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mike. And then Sandy Rees-Jones, to come to you now. You know, you 40 years experience as a journalist and a marketeer in our industry, and you know, hearing the story and hearing the promise and hearing it's not great. You know, how do we celebrate and share more, and how can we make maybe that kind of success a daily conversation and not just a token award once a year to pat someone on the back and then move on? What's your thoughts there?
Well, I think that there are so many threads in this great session, and I have to say, Jamie, it was music to my ears, because Jamie, what you have done is do what is often lacking. You actually did the essential thing of hard facts. You delivered some hard facts in a great way, and you gave some ways forward. And we don't get that often in our industry. So I would personally like you to give you a gold star for doing that, because that's how we do it. We need the facts. You did the observation, and you did the other very important thing, which is there were three important things in making change. Money. You raised the money thing. This will cost you, guys. You brought in the emotion. And Mike, earlier in our initial discussion, you talked about the awfulness of accidents on site. And there's emotion there. And there's also more general emotion, which is people get really fed up with disruption. You know, if you talk to the person on the omnibus or in the street and they see the roads being dug up and they see things going wrong, there's the personal emotion of loss, there's the emotion of the impact on our industry of seeing this. And that's significant and that translates into money. But I think there's another issue, which is regulation, or how do we actually make it stick? But you ground all that in. I think the other shocking thing is the fact that we don't have as-built drawings shared with the utility companies. I mean, come on, guys. You know, Deb, you just said we've been talking about this for 40 years. Mike, you talked about Latham. I was on constructing excellence and the movement for innovation. And I think to avoid going into a long, complicated thing, there's a problem with the word innovation. And I think it was Alan Crane who raised this on the movement for innovation when he said, innovation is a bit of a scary word because it implies it's got to be something incredibly new and very different and probably expensive. And people are going to be worried about it because it is new. So who's going to take the risk? And risk is another word that comes out throughout our industry. And I think, and Allison, your view on this, I think would be interesting. Innovation isn't necessarily rocket science. And I had a sudden thought before we began this session, which is, and it's picking up something you said, Mike, we do things when we have to in the industry. It's almost we're driven into it. This has gone wrong, so let's sort it out now, and maybe we'll remember it. So there's a bit of necessity is the mother of invention. I'd like to suggest that curiosity might be the mother of innovation. You were curious, Jamie, and you went and found out, and you got the facts, and you then came to deliver some way of solving it. So I think getting back to the question, I haven't forgotten the question you asked me, Debs, which is how do we do this? I think it's how you deliver that message with those core things that will strike the audience that you're talking to. So the money thing gets the message through with the people who can see the loss. The emotion gets through to the people who then need to see how they change attitudes. And then I think there's the stick, if you like. Where are the teeth? Where are the regulations? Or maybe that's too strong a word. Where are the frameworks that are agreed when you go into the contract? I mean, I spent years working with FIDIC on their standard conditions and also with the BPF. And unforeseen ground conditions were always the big bugbear in the risk. So I think there's something there. How can we wrap into contracts at every level the recognition these things need to be recognized and there are ways of doing it better? And I think that then gives a very persuasive story to get more people thinking about how do we do it differently? And that's innovation. And I'll stop there. But again, congratulations, Jamie. It was a real pleasure listening to what you've done.
Thanks, Sandy. That's great. I mean, and again, it's, you know, you've picked up on two of the things that, you know, I was going to sort of raise next and open up to the panel is, you know, regulation as, you know, actually can be a huge driver for innovation. By setting a new bar, a standard, an expectation, maybe, that causes people to think, well, how are we going to achieve that and still be in business? The clients also, them setting the bar on, well, what does good mean to me? How much better, bigger, faster, cheaper, whatever do I want this to be? And of course, therein lies a challenge for the client themselves to know, because there's one thing to set it, there's another thing for the industry to reply. But I guess metrics and numbers for me, particularly as an engineer, you know, they always ring true, and they get your attention. And I think having a sort of some metrics that both define the challenge and the implication, and as you said, Jamie, I think what's the implication if you don't do it, as very much as, well, look at the possibilities that could be done. But with all this, we know setting regulations, setting targets, can actually be quite divisive and can steer an awful lot of behaviours and loss of money and costs for the industry to try to achieve that. So I don't know whether maybe Malcolm or Mike want to come back from you again for your experience of the pitfalls maybe of setting targets, regulation, standards, whatever, but how can we avoid it being not having the right outcome for us?
Behaviours was mentioned earlier, and we talk about skills and knowledge. I think we should add behaviours to that, because that is fundamental to everyone's approach to their daily work. And no matter how much regulation, how many rules we have, people will still tend to do what they think is right. And it probably isn't in many instances. So I think people's behaviour is, we can link it to quality, you can link it to building safety that I touched on earlier. We will get a lot of regulation out of that. We will get a lot of thou shalt do X, Y, Z. But unless we get people's thinking right, get the thinking right, and everything else will flow from that. And I'm afraid that is about a dripping tap. That is about leadership. That is about organisational leadership that just keeps saying the right thing and setting a good example, dare I say, for the rest of the nation. I'll close at that because I might verge on to other matters which are not construction related.
Thanks. Malcolm, do you want to come in there as well?
Yeah, just some really interesting stuff there. I would say that there's a lot there that talked about behaviours and other things. What we're trying to do alongside the digital stuff and getting that operational stuff right, to me, it's about creating the right environment. So you create the right environment by because it's really difficult to manage that supply chain, and responsibilities get passed down, and a utility company is brought in and they go to the cheapest quote from their supply chain to bring somebody in, and that's where we can lose control. So for us, it's about creating the right environment. That's what we're trying to do. So we engage with people. We actually empower them about the work that they're carrying out and what they do, and we involve them in planning for the task, so that it's not just something that's passed down and okay, it's your responsibility. Make sure you don't hurt anybody. And if we can act with integrity and get the trust of the guys who are actually on the ground carrying out the work, that's a key area that we've worked on over the last 6 months and that we're going to work on throughout this year. And that links back to what Mike said. It's about behaviours, it's about attitudes, and then it brings in skill sets. But yeah, we must create the right environment.
Brilliant, thank you. And just quick comment from you, and Ali, I was thinking in many ways that your members have signed up, got the badge, we're members of Constructing Excellence, and therefore already they're interested and want to be part of that movement, for want of a better description. How much does the members of Constructing Excellence want to be seen to be doing more and be trailblazers?
I think they absolutely do. They want to make this work. And actually, Deborah, you and I work together really closely in the Knowledge Transfer Network. And one of the big barriers to a lot of this, we've worked with lots of innovators who had great ideas. And one of the big things that holds us back is actually the commercial models that allow people to come to work and do their best job. There's no shortage of people with great ideas, with innovation, but somehow they're not incentivized to bring that to the table when those commercial models come through. And we're doing a lot of work. We're doing work with the Construction Innovation Hub on this, around how do you actually, what does value look like? How do you communicate that? How do you procure that? How do you manage risk? How do you incentivize people to work collaboratively to make that innovation happen? And it was an eye-opener to me, actually, from my background, and that sort of, we're working with all these great ideas, why can't they get the traction they need? And if there's the behaviors piece, but there's the contractual piece that actually enables those behaviors to be the right behaviors, and people are incentivized in the right way, which Jamie was proposing as well, actually, which is great.
That's great, thank you. Just one thing from you then, Jamie, to sort of, there you are, young, dare I say it, if I'm allowed, you know, early career for you in your company and Sir Robert McAlpine, and in many ways doing this project and the subject is slightly out of step with your day job, but you know how I think part of this is us embracing youth and new ideas. And how do you feel now about what you've done in this project and where it's going, but your approach maybe in your day job to bringing ideas out and dealing with your colleagues and things? How are you sitting now in your mind as to the confidence to do that?
I think I've always been around construction, and I've always known some of the outdated ideologies and methodologies used within it. However, once I started getting involved, you know, prime example, the WCC scholarship, you know, that was a prime example of governing body looking to make development and not asking for anything in return. And it's when you start looking around, you start realizing there's grants, there's support, there's innovation networks that allow you to make a difference. I think it's about educating, and some of my research, some of my figures, I realized I was, having done this research, I was then armed to bring up things that people didn't know on site. Prime example, people carrying out the excavations, they weren't aware of the dangers of hitting 11,000 volt cable. They physically, all they see is a bit of cable in the ground. They're not aware of that. So by having that almost tool to educate, showed them a video, all of a sudden it was, well, hang on a minute, this isn't just, you know, a cable in the ground. Actually, this is something that has the power of a small bomb. You know, this is a hugely dangerous piece. We need to be more careful around it. And it's just raising awareness, increasing that kind of not level of education, that's the wrong way of phrasing it, but just having people understand these kind of small impacts and small issues that can have massive impacts, and just that kind of change in perception brings a different mentality to it. And I think that's definitely what this has done for me recently, especially.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're all out of time, it's flying by. Before we wrap up, I'm going to hand over to Arthur Seymour, the master, to just say a few words and sort of a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Deborah. You must excuse my appearance. I had an argument with the road yesterday.
I was going to say, what did the other chap look like?
Absolutely right. Okay. Yes. What a good presentation. Absolutely fascinating. I was an apprentice electrician working on building sites more years ago than I care to remember. But believe it or not, we did have mechanical diggers in those days, and this was happening all the time, and it obviously hasn't got a great deal better. So this is an area where there is room for improvement. Jamie, of course, did a super job, and congratulations to you, Jamie. That is really good and really well done. Of course, he doesn't do it alone. There is the support from Deborah's committee and the mentors who helped him along the way and gave him a bit of guidance. And so many thanks to them. The Syrian Dixon Scholarship is very important to us. We've been doing it since 1977 with 1997, I think. We've had about 30 students go through this thing. We couldn't do it without Lady Dixon. So very, very many thanks to you, Valerie. It's super. The CIOB, of course, have supported this for many years as well. So it all comes together. As always, these things are always such food for thought. The panel were great. I like the way you extended it into other areas slightly, and it was a really good, useful discussion. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, Arthur. Over to you, Mike, as the current president of the CIOB, again, just to say a few words from that.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're running late, but there are a few points I'd like to make, Deb. I think you mentioned earlier, if ever there was a time for innovation to support the construction sector, then this is it. I think you mentioned the exceptional global growth and keeping up with the opportunities that are around the corner. And of course, in the last couple of years, we've all experienced some innovation in having to be adaptable to COVID and the different sort of ways we've all been working. And that's shown some resilience, I think, and the construction industry in particular, which kept going, you know, because it was so necessary that it did keep going with and organising its practices accordingly. And many CIOB members involved in that, which I'm proud of. So in spite of the many challenges, and we've heard about some, and I can tend to be a bit downbeat sometimes, I'm actually quite optimistic, believe it or not. And especially having heard Jamie and the fantastic presentation that he gave earlier. I think we're in a good place to adopt more innovation. I think some unfortunate situations will perhaps help to drive that. I mentioned Grenfell again, as unfortunate as that might be. But collaboration is key, right from the start, from the client setting the expectations, right through the supply chain, the principal contractors. And I mentioned education as well. The education colleges and universities have a big part to play in this, and they've got to do their bit. The other thing that struck me is how much of what we've talked about tonight has a massive alignment with mental health and well-being. And I often think about health and safety. We talk a lot about safety, and perhaps we don't talk enough about health and what it means for people having safe working environments, and as someone has said, being able to go home each night. I've mentioned collaboration. I'm so passionate about that with all the players in the construction industry because it is so important. All these themes cut right across the industry, and they're at the heart of a lot of the work that CIOB does. I want to thank Jamie for his work on this project and for putting his hand up, taking on the scholarship. Without someone willing to do this work, share their ideas, gather the data, and then share the outcomes, which is what you've done tonight, Jamie, it will be difficult to make progress, and more people need to do it. So a really big thank you from me to you. Fantastic stuff. I'd also like to thank those responsible for organising. This is my first involvement with this scholarship, and I've been very impressed, actually. So I want to say thank you to all those involved in organising this and the event, which will take place in a couple of weeks' time. As president, I'm proud, I'm pleased, and I'm chuffed that CIOB is supportive of this, and I hope that can continue. I've tried to be brief, so I'm going to close at that. It's been a privilege for me to be involved, so thank you for that. I've really appreciated it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. That's great. So it just remains with me to say the presentation this evening, and also a longer interview that Jamie gave, which Paul Singh, a sort of fellow constructor, did with him, which he really digs a bit more deeper about his motivations and where he is in his career, which is a good listen. And the longer report will be available all through the website over the next month or so. Also, we've got next week presentations from two of our other scholars, Megan and Martha, who are talking about their work in relation to improving biodiversity in urban areas, and also maintain the value of engineered timber within the supply chain. So again, two really good topics that are part of our sustainability scholarship program. And then also at the moment we're open to new applications for the Sir Ian Dixon Scholarship. So we will make sure that you all get details on this. So please, if you or your colleagues or any of your contacts you think would be interested in any of this, please share as you see fit. And thank you very much, everybody in my team, for doing such a fantastic thing. It couldn't happen without them. And thanks and good night.